already doing it and or doing other things that are also important. So that's great. Who's moving the charts?
Хто перемикає в нас? Олександр, хто перемикає?
Is there
Let's move the charts.
all right. So I'm going to talk about a number of things tonight. I'm going to talk about the revolution that is happening in space flight and what it means. I'm talking about why Ukraine should join it. I'm talking about how Ukraine can actually become one of its leaders and why it's important for the world that Ukraine does so. Okay. That's a lot to cover. But we'll see what we can do. So, next chart. Okay. The ancients said there were 4 virtues: courage, wisdom, justice, and moderation. To these, the Christians added 3 more: love, hope, and faith. So 7 altogether. And of these, I think that courage is the most important, because without it, none of the others can matter. I think love is the second. Wisdom's number 3. Yes, if you have courage and if you want to do good, you still have to know how to do it. And science is basically, wisdom here is meant practical wisdom, how to do things, and technology. So science is part of wisdom. And virtue number 3, still pretty high on the list. It's essential in order to enable courage to prevail. Ukraine certainly has courage, and that is number 1 quality needed. But we also have to bring science into the game. Next. All right, so science can give Ukraine space. Okay, so this is a photograph of something that many of you may have seen when it happened. This is February 2018, so this is now 6 years ago. This is the launch and landing of the Falcon Heavy rocket. Okay, so those rockets are not taking off, they're coming down and landing, which is actually more impressive. So this was a spectacular accomplishment by the SpaceX company. The cost of space launch at the time of Sputnik was astronomical. And then as people developed ways to do space technology, it came down to about $10,000 a kilogram by 1970, the time of the moon landings. And it stayed there, however, for the next 40 years, until 2010. It stayed the same. But since 2010, as a result of SpaceX introducing reusable rockets, it has fallen by a factor of 5, from $10,000 a kilogram to $2,000 a kilogram. And these Falcons are only, they're not completely reusable, they're mostly reusable. They reuse the first stage, they throw away the second stage. But SpaceX is now working on a more advanced vehicle, which they call the Starship, which is fully reusable, 2-stage orbit, and it also has 5 times the capability of the Falcons. Although the Falcons are very impressive. Last year, they launched 100 of them inside of 1 year, that is 2 per week, which is incredible. But Starship will be fully reusable and 5 times the capability of a Falcon. And basically, they're looking at cutting the cost of space launch by another factor of 5, from $2,000 a kilogram to about $400 a kilogram, which 2000 has already changed things in space. It's made a whole bunch of business plans that people are interested in doing in space possible, which previously the numbers simply didn't make any sense. And $400 a kilogram will certainly make many more. And as a result of the cheapening in space launch, there's a lot more space launches going on. You'd expect that. There's more space businesses happening. And the more space launches there are, the cheaper the space launch can get. So they feed on each other. And furthermore, the cheaper space launch gets, the faster space technology advances. Because, you see, between Sputnik and the moon landing, new things had to be developed in order to do things in space. Space communication, space propulsion, instrumentation, navigation, orbital rendezvous, re-entry technologies. There are all sorts of new things that had to be figured out. But by about 1970, people had figured out a way to do more or less anything you wanted to do. And after that, the wisdom was, don't do anything new. Don't use anything that hasn't been used before. Because even it might be attractive. Okay, here is a cheaper battery or a lighter battery. Why bother? Why do this to save $3 million? The launch costs $500 million. Are you going to risk $500 million to save 3? No. Don't do anything new. And that caused a great stagnation in space technology. But when the cost of space launch comes down, then spacecraft designers can be less conservative and try many more new things. And so the spacecrafts themselves are advancing. And we now have miniaturization. People here may have heard of things called CubeSats, little satellites this big. And you put a few of them together and create satellites this big, and that's still pretty small. And there are now satellites that weigh 10 kilograms that can do what it used to take a 1,000-kilogram satellite to do. And they're also about much, much cheaper. And even things a bit bigger than that, for instance, the Starlink satellites are a couple of 100 kilograms, which is bigger than that, but much smaller than communication satellites used to be. And SpaceX has launched close to 2,000 of them right now, which is more satellites than all the rest of the satellites that are in orbit that have launched since 1957. So this is happening. Now, but as part of this, or as a product of this, in addition to introducing these exciting technologies, what Musk and SpaceX have done is proven a point that it is possible for a well-led entrepreneurial team to do things in space that previously it was thought that only the governments of superpowers could do. And not only that, do them in 1/3 the time at 1/10 the cost, and even do things that were thought impossible. And so there's just dozens and dozens of new space companies getting started. And because it is now being led by private companies, it's not a closed game anymore. At the time of the moon race, the only space countries that mattered were the United States and the Soviet Union. Later on, Europeans, maybe Japan. But it was only governments of very large countries who play this game. Now, it's not only governments, it's private companies. There's a New Zealand company called Rocket Lab that has reached orbit and is preparing a mission to Venus. Now, New Zealand doesn't even have a space program, and it has reached orbit because of a private company. And not a private company started by a billionaire like Elon Musk, but just by working engineers who came up with a good idea and managed to find investors. So this is what is happening. And it is especially happening in countries that are free. It is an interesting fact that this is not happening in Russia. Okay? It's not. Okay? Despite the fact that, of course, the Soviet Union at one time was one of the two leading space powers. It's not happening there. Okay? One reason, of course, is if someone did start a SpaceX in Russia, Putin would steal it. Okay? I mean, that's important. That's why it's not happening, to be precise. But it is happening in countries like New Zealand and the United States and Canada and some Latin American countries, so forth. And it could happen here. It could happen here. And there's a number of advantages that Ukraine would have in launching companies like this. You do have very skilled, technically adept people, and perhaps you feel this is unfortunate. I would if I were you, but nevertheless, it's an advantage, the low pay scale, that gives you a competitive advantage against, for instance, American companies and so forth. Anyway, this is happening. Next chart. Okay, now, why is this important that Ukraine get into this? Well, one obvious answer is the military situation. Okay, this war that you are fighting right now is the first space war. Okay, it's a space war. Okay, in that space assets are playing a decisive role. Okay, there have been space assets involved in wars since Vietnam. The United States used reconnaissance satellites in Vietnam, and we've used reconnaissance and communication and GPS satellites against Iraq, but they were not important. Okay, we would have beaten Saddam Hussein without GPS. It was just an extra thing to have. Okay, this war, it is the decisive thing. The reason why Ukraine is able to fight evenly against Russia, which outnumbers you 4-1, is because of space assets, space-based communication, space-based reconnaissance, and space-based GPS-guided munitions. Okay, here, of course, I think you all know about the very famous Russian warship, Moscow. Okay.
It's submarine now.
It was made famous with the help of space-based assets. The Ukraine sank it with 2 missiles, not 100 missiles of which 2 hit, just 2 missiles launched, 2 missiles hit, because they were GPS guided, okay, leaving it to be towed away by so this is the thing. Now, this time, okay, the space assets in question are American, and I'm very happy that these are being provided to you. I wish we were doing more than that, but we are doing that. In 2014, they were not. Okay, in 2014, they were not. In 2014, when Ukraine was winning in Donetsk, and the Russians massed armored forces on the flanks of your forces preparing to come and surround you, there was no way those concentrations could have been missed by our reconnaissance satellites. We knew that was coming. Barack Obama decided not to tell you. So the point is, while I wish I could tell you could always count on America, you can't. You need to have your own capabilities of this kind. Okay? You really do. But it also must be said is as a result of these incredible things you have been able to do with the help of these space assets. This has certainly caught everyone's attention, that space superiority is now the decisive factor in any large-scale conventional war. In any large-scale conventional war between more evenly matched opponents, whichever side had space superiority would win quickly. So just as in the 20th century, in World War II, for example, air power decided who would win on the ground. Yes, all the fighting happens on the ground, almost all, but the air would decide which side won. Today, all the fighting occurs on the ground or on the sea, but it's space power will decide which side wins. Next chart. Now, prosperity, being able to do things in space is going to be extremely important. Your commercial prosperity as well. Now this includes the participation in space business, which is becoming a very big business, but also the space technology benefits many other industries, but also embracing the challenge of space creates intellectual capital. And this is a chart here which shows the number of science graduates in the United States from 1960 to 1990. And the most remarkable part of this chart is this part, from 1960 to 1970. And what you're seeing there is the number of science graduates in the United States more than doubles, almost triples, during those 10 years. Why? That's the moon race. That's Apollo. That's me graduating right there. Because what the Apollo program, we were going for the moon and we were going to go to Mars after that and Saturn after that. And it made science the great adventure, And youth loves adventure. The spirit of youth is the spirit of adventure. And I can tell you, since this is when I was growing up, space was the grand adventure. And now I happen to be unusual in my generation of little boy mad scientists making rocket fuel and robots in the basement, that I actually ended up working in the space program. Most of the rest of them ended up creating the computer revolution, which is why they have a lot more money than me. But I can't complain, I've had fun. But that's actually the point. The point is that the intellectual capital you develop based on the challenge of space creates strengths across the board, not just in space, but in all sorts of other technologies, in creating the computers and the internet, and now biotech and other very exciting fields. And then what happened, you see, was exactly when they killed the program, it stops. And if there really was a decisive initiative, for example, to reach out and get humans to Mars and establish humans on Mars, this would take off again. And not just in the United States, but in every country that decides to participate in a serious way. So definitely the Ukraine should make itself part of this. Next chart. All right, and then there is the future. Just talked mostly about the here and now, but there is going to be a future. And I think that, first of all, in the future, this war is going to be looked back on as Ukraine's war of independence. That's really what it is. This is really when you're being born as a nation, and I think you can become a great nation. And great nations do great things. And what is this age going to be remembered for? I'm an American. If you ask any American what happened in the year 1492, they would answer that is the year when Columbus sailed. Okay? And that is the only thing that most Americans will remember about 1492. It's by far the most important event in the world that this Italian sailor got in 3 ships and sailed off into the ocean. Now, meantime, in Europe, all sorts of other things were happening. In 1492, England and France signed a peace treaty. Okay? In 1492, the Borgias took over the papacy in Rome, were the most powerful political institution in the world at the time. Lorenzo de' Medici, the sponsor of the Renaissance, died in 1492. I bet in 1492 a whole bunch of people were murdered in Moscow. Happened. But nobody remembers that. What we remember is Columbus, right? 500 years from now, only history specialists will remember who Vladimir Putin was, okay? Or who Donald Trump was. Okay? But what they will remember is the people that opened up the new worlds in space. That is what they're going to remember about this time. This time will be remembered because this is when we first set sail for other worlds. So, you know, we're here right now in the middle of this flight, etc. But in 500 years, it will be the venture into space that is what's remembered. And Ukraine should play its part. And if you want people on Mars to know who Taras Shevchenko was, you need to be among the people that go there, okay? The only people who have descendants are the people who have children, okay? And that's what this is about, creating new branches of human civilization. And those nations that take part will be those that put their stamp on the future. And in this connection, I mean, let me just say a few things. As a result of the development of reusable rockets, not too far from now, in the future, there will be something very new in the world, which are used rockets. Never has been. Now, you cannot buy a used Saturn V or a used Proton. If they're used, they're destroyed. But now that there are reusable rockets, there's going to be used rockets. And as you know, used cars are much cheaper than new cars. There's a lot of people driving cars right now all over the world that could not possibly afford a new car, but nevertheless, they've got their set of wheels because they bought it used. It would be 1/10 the cost of a new car. So used rockets means cheap rockets. It means people can be able to buy their own rockets. Okay. And so I believe that groups of people who actually do want to make a new start on, for instance, Mars, will be able to do so. Now, people sometimes ask me, what's the government going to be like on Mars? Well, there will be many governments on Mars, okay, because there will be many settlements on Mars established by all sorts of different people with different ideas on what the ideal society, for example, should be, okay? And what's going to decide which ones is the one that prevails? Well, natural selection, the one that works the best. In particular, the ones that attract the most immigrants, okay? Which is one reason why I believe that the prevailing form of society on Mars will be, number one, free societies, because no one would want to emigrate to a tyranny, okay? And number two, will be a better form of society, okay? Because you're going to have all these experiments, essentially, launched, and it's the ones that work the best, that offer people the most chance to do something with their human potential in every way, those are going to attract immigrants. Those are going to become examples, not just to the other cities on Mars, but to Earth as well. And since Martian cities will need to be extremely inventive in order to develop the technologies to meet the challenge of the frontier, well, first of all, they're going to make many inventions that contribute to humanity as a whole. So that's one way in which the entire human race will benefit from these frontier societies. And also, actually, one of their main exports will be such technologies, licensing them on Earth. But, to talk more about that, but this is in fact why it's important to all of humanity that we expand into space, to create new creative branches of human civilization that add to human progress. And, well, next. Okay, so how can Ukraine become a leader in the spaceflight revolution? And first of all, you're going to need a space program. In other words, you want to have an ecosystem that includes both the government space effort, but that fosters private space companies. Okay? And it's important that the government space effort be purpose-driven, not vendor-driven. And this is a problem that all countries with space agencies have to one degree or another. We certainly have it in the United States. That is, you have an agency like NASA, sometimes they have a clear purpose. They spend money to do important things, okay? Other times, they are vendor-driven. They do things in order to spend money. Okay? So Apollo, for example, was purpose-driven. It wasn't science-driven, but it had a purpose. It was to astonish the world with what free people could do. It did. Okay? Artemis, unfortunately, is largely vendor-driven. It's how do we get money to these people here and these people there? And so you have a random assortment of projects that don't really fit together, and it's a very confused program. And there are a number of other, in other words, why are we building a space station in orbit around the moon? You do not need a space station in orbit around the moon in order to go to the moon. We went to the moon without one, and we could do it again, but that's a project. The Orion capsule is much too big for the SLS rocket to deliver it into lunar orbit with enough propellant for it to come home. So the whole thing's goofy. But in any case, you want your program to be purpose-driven, not vendor-driven. You want to do the large majority of R&D through innovative private companies. You want to foster an ecosystem of such companies, both large and small. You want to embrace and lead the development of stratosphere technology. Okay. Now, this is an area that I'm very interested in, and I strongly recommend it to Ukraine. The stratosphere, the moons, are a very easy way to reach the edge of space. And it has both scientific and military applications to be able to do that. This is a new environment in which all sorts of things can be done. And I think that it's important that Ukraine actually take the lead in this. And these technologies can be used even in the current war, but they can also be used in space exploration. You can fly balloons on Mars, for example, and flying at low altitude on Mars is the same as flying at 30 kilometers on Earth. It can be done. And you could fly all over Mars with these things with cameras and ground-penetrating radars. And if you have this kind of technology, you could participate in interplanetary missions as the specialist in that payload. In other words, an American spacecraft, for example, might take your balloon to Mars and then deploy you, and then you have your balloon flying all over Mars with cameras and radars and things. Get into the game as an important player. You want to embrace and lead the small sat revolution. This is, if you were to interested in starting your own space company right now, it takes a great deal of capital to start a launch vehicle company. That's pretty hard. And you'd be competing against SpaceX and the Chinese and some others. That's tough. But the small sats, using microelectronics, that is the kind of thing where a small company with limited capital can get in, both the satellites themselves or subsystems for such satellites. If you do get into launch vehicles, you want to embrace reusability, especially for the first stage. Second stage is debatable, but there's absolutely no question that using the first stage of a rocket makes a great deal of sense. Because the reason why is this: the first stage, first of all, it pays off much more to reuse the first stage than the second, because the first stage is bigger, a lot bigger, usually about a factor of 10 bigger. So most of the gain from reusability comes from reusing the first stage. It's easier to do because the first stage doesn't go as high or as fast. So the thermal protection on it when it comes back down is much easier than the second stage. The penalty of the extra weight to use the first stage is smaller than the second stage. So if you're going to do reusable rockets, at least reuse the first stage. Join in international missions. That is, for instance, especially if you have a unique payload that can be flown on such missions. In other words, you don't have to do the whole mission yourself. You could become part of American and European missions. This may have to wait till after the war, but launch your own planetary missions. I mean, look, 3 years ago, the United Arab Emirates had its own Mars orbiter. Okay, it was launched by an American rocket, but the whole spacecraft was United Arab Emirates. Now, United Arab Emirates isn't even a real country. Okay, it's more of a gentleman's agreement. And if they can do an interplanetary mission, and New Zealand can do an interplanetary mission, Ukraine can absolutely do an interplanetary mission. Okay, and I think that if you did, it would be a real statement. A real statement that you've arrived, that you're a country of the first rank. Okay. And with that, and by the way, I think it's important for your economy as a whole that you do make such statements. I have to say, over the past week, I've had a lot of meetings with Ukrainian technologists in a number of areas. And I'm very impressed by the level of expertise and excellence that many of them have. If this was known more widely, there'd be a lot more investment from international sources in creating companies in Ukraine. And one way to show that is by doing your space missions. And then also, if you're participating in, for instance, NASA programs, there are big pieces missing. NASA says it wants to have a moon base, Mars base. One thing that would be incredibly useful for such bases would be a nuclear reactor on the surface to provide reliable day-night power. They're not developing it. Ukraine has expertise in nuclear power. So, in other words, rather than trying to jump in things like the launch vehicle where they already got it, you can take parts of this that they don't have and make it yours. Next chart. All right, now we're going to come back to the world as it is. This is, people may know that the early United States was divided into two parts that were very different from each other, the North and the South, okay? Okay, the fundamental problem that early America had was a severe labor shortage relative to, say, Europe, okay? And so how do you deal with that? The North dealt with it through technology, gadgeteering, okay, labor-saving machinery. And this became a passion in America, and we created a whole culture of backyard inventors. Slogan, Yankee Ingenuity. Magazines were set up for home inventors. This was a thing, and it even is a cultural stereotype of Americans. Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Edison, the writer, me, I fit into that stereotype as the American inventor. I am an inventor. And you see, labor-saving machinery is labor productivity multiplying machinery. That's what it is. And since the average amount of product that can be available for each person on average equals the average produced per person, if you increase productivity, you increase the average rate of pay. Okay? That's what you do. So, therefore, the North, I mean, you look back on it now and it seems very harsh, but relative to wages, for instance, in Europe or certainly Asia, they were vastly higher in America, and that's why working people would risk a lot, pay a lot to come to America to be where the pay was much higher than in Europe. This was to the North. The South attempted to deal with the labor shortage through an entirely different way, which was slavery, coercion, okay, ultra cheap labor, okay, using low technology. Because in fact, if you use slaves, you can't even use the standard agricultural technology that, for instance, European peasants might have been using, because the slaves will harm horses. And damage plows and things because they hate the master. And so you had very cheap but extremely inefficient labor. But that was the South. So, 1858, which is 3 years before our Civil War began, Abraham Lincoln gave a speech in which he said the following: "A house divided against itself cannot stand. I believe this government cannot endure permanently half slave and half free. I do not expect the Union to be dissolved. I do not expect the house to fall. But I do expect it will cease to be divided. It will become all one thing or all the other." And it did. Okay, we had a civil war between the North and the South. And this is a painting here, which is very familiar to Americans. This is a painting showing the surrender of the Southerners at Appomattox, April 9th, 1865. Exactly 87 years to the day before I was born. And okay, so here they are, they're surrendering. Okay, so the North won. Now, the North is also called the Union, South is also called the Confederacy. If you ask any Civil War buff in the United States, why did the North win? Okay, they would answer the following. They would say, the North won because it had a much larger population and much more industry. And that is true. But then you have to ask, why did the North have a larger population and more industry? Well, it's because it was free. Okay. The Union Army, the Northern Army, was 40% immigrants or first-generation Americans. All the immigrants went to the North. The Confederate Army was only 3% immigrants. Okay? European immigrants didn't want to go to the South where they have to work in competition with slave labor. went to the north. All the talent went to the north. Okay, and so the north had more people and more technology and more ingenuity and more of everything. So it won. So that was settled 150 years ago. But the world today is a house divided. It is half slave and half free. And I believe that it must become all one or all the other. Okay? And if you want to know, that is why I am here. Okay? That's why I'm here. That's why this war matters to me. Okay? Because I believe that this is a decisive battle in this war. And I believe that the free world will win this and the larger war of which it is a part for the same reason that the Union won. Exact same reason, because this is where the talent is. This is where such talent as exists in the other part of the world will go. Okay? Next chart. All right. Now, where does science come from? It comes from freedom. It comes from free thought. Okay? Slavery never invented any advanced technologies. It is freedom, free thought, free labor that invents advanced technology and that makes discoveries and figures out a way to put them into action. Okay? And then it is science that gives us freedom. Okay? Both because it provides the people who are capable of developing military advantages, but even more broadly, technology is a form of freedom. It frees you from toil. Okay? So freedom will give us science. Science will give us freedom. One of the things that science gives you is space. One of the things that space will give you is freedom. Okay? So there it is. And next chart. And we've got the book, which will tell you more. Thank you. I'll take questions.
Okay, I have the question because our discuss, I call it about how to have the victory from space. And what they discuss now in USA about the Russian space verb. You looking about the Congress speech, something or another, how the United States want to answer from Russian terrorism in the space?
You mean the Russians developing the anti-satellite weapon?
Yeah.
Well, we're going to have to develop stuff to deal with that. I believe we will. I mean, look, we've got a bunch of problems in the United States right now. But they've got more. Okay, they've got more problems. I mean, we were capable of creating, of having an environment in which something like SpaceX could be created. Okay, and I have to say, you know, I know Elon Musk, and I disagree with him extremely strongly, for instance, about Ukraine and Russia, and because you may know he says some very stupid things about this war. But nevertheless, it is a fact that the existence of SpaceX has afforded the free world some very important advantages in this war and the balance of power more broadly. No, we're going to have to deal with this. But, you know, look, here's the thing. Whenever a more challenging environment is opened to military activity, it always benefits the more liberal society. Okay, for instance, if you look at sea power, okay, from the time of ancient Athens up to the great days of the British Navy, it was always the more liberal societies that predominated on the sea. Okay, And then when you get to air power, okay, while it is true that it was the Germans and Japanese who initially exploited air power in World War II, they were rapidly overtaken by a lot by the Anglo-Americans, the British and the Americans, in terms of, by late in World War II, we're doing things with air power that are totally crushing them. And a space race. It was the Soviets who were the first into space. They Sputniked us, okay? And okay, fine, and in fact, my dog is named Strelka. Didn't know it. So I'm aware of that, and hats off. They opened that up. But the Americans rapidly, or fairly rapidly, overtook them in space, okay? And we got to the moon first. I mean, even though our program was, of course, Apollo was a government program, it took advantage of the greater creative potentials available in a free society to outdo the Soviets in space. So here we are. The space is now being opened up to a much greater extent as a decisive domain of military power. And I believe that the free societies will have an enormous advantage in this realm over the others, okay? And by the way, I've spoken to a fair number of Ukrainians who've been at the front, and they comment on the inflexible and stupid tactics that are being used by the Russians in many cases. And once again, they're not thinking. They don't allow thinking at the bottom. If there's any thinking, it has to come from the top. And occasionally they do come up with some things that from a tactical point of view are sharp. But within the organization, there's a lot less creativity that can happen at the bottom, at the middle, and even at the top. And it costs them. And because technology is not something that's just implemented by scientists with PhDs, it's something that's implemented by soldiers who think of a clever way to use an FPV drone in a way that it hasn't been used before. Okay, that's science too, okay, from the bottom up. And so I believe we will beat them in space because we are more creative. Yes. Sir,
Thank you, Robert, for all this information. My question is next. So we are now in the middle of 20th of the 21st century. And what's your opinion? What will be the main achievement, maybe the main milestone for humanity in space exploration in this decade?
Okay, that's an interesting question. All right. There's a lot of things that can happen that can, it's very difficult to make predictions, especially about the future. But let's take the optimistic one first. If we can settle this matter here, okay, and I believe by repelling the invasion, restoring deterrence, okay, which is what kept the peace for almost 80 years after World War II, and it's now been challenged. But if we can restore deterrence, so we go back to a condition of general peace, and if Elon Musk just like focuses again on SpaceX and not on crazy things like Twitter, and doesn't skate off the edge of the ice, then I believe that SpaceX, well, first of all, I believe that Starship will be operational by the end of this year. Okay, I'll make that prediction.
This year.
This year. Starship will reach orbit this year. Okay, they've been making tests, you know, and the first one failed, and the second one also failed, but it got further into the launch envelope than the first. And the third failed too, but it got further. And this is their methodology. Fly, crash, figure out what went wrong, get further the next time, crash, get further. So within the next 2 or 3 launches, they will succeed. Okay? And it'll probably happen this year. If not, then certainly next year. But then the question is, will they make it to Mars? Now, you know, if Starship is operational, and if we actually had a new president next year, which unfortunately we're not going to have because both of the candidates are used presidents. But you know, if Nikki Haley had won, then it would be different. But okay, it may have to wait a bit. But in 2028, we will have a new president, and by then Starship will not only be operational, it will be accepted as part of reality that these things exist, and 100-ton delivery capability on reusable ships, and they're flying, you know, 25 of them a year or something. And you have a new president, they're going to say, look, here's this guy that wants to send people to Mars. If we got together with him, could we have people on Mars by the end of my second term, that is to say 2036? The answer will be unquestionably yes. Will we need to spend $1 trillion to do it? No, we probably could do it within the existing NASA budget. He's got the ship, there's a bunch of other stuff that's needed, but they cost much less. If we did that part, he does this part, we go. Okay, and then you have humans landing on Mars by the mid-2030s, and you have a permanent Mars base in the 2040s, you know, and you have, you know, the children born on Mars by 2050, and the first human settlements happening mid-century. I think this can happen. I think this is what should happen. It might not happen. There's, you know, a bunch of alternative histories that can happen that would be much less favorable than that. But I believe it can happen. And it may be hard to see that happening right now, okay, especially given where you are and you're hearing air raid sirens at night, okay? But let me tell you a story, okay? In 1970, Apollo astronauts landed on the moon. This wasn't the first landing, it was about the third, near the crater Aristarchus, okay? And the crater Aristarchus was the location where a famous novel by Arthur Clarke, the science fiction writer, okay, he set one of his novels called Earthlight intrigue in an astronomical observatory in the crater Aristarchus. That's what the novel Earthlight is about, and it's a great novel. Okay, and one of the Apollo astronauts had read that book, and he said this, he said, we're here at the crater Aristarchus, the scene of Arthur Clarke's great novel Earthlight, and wouldn't he be proud to know that we're here now if he was alive today? Now, in fact, Arthur Clarke was alive in 1970, and he heard the Apollo astronauts say this, and so the reporters asked him, so what do you think, Arthur? And he says, well, yes, I certainly am proud and happy that this is happening. But I have to tell you something. I wrote that novel while I was manning a radar station in England during the Blitz in 1940. Air raid sirens going off and the bombs coming down. And if anybody had told me then that 30 years later, people would be walking around on the moon in that very place, I would have thought it was the wildest poppycock imaginable. And yet there they were. Okay? So, yes. You know, good things can happen. They don't always happen, but they can.
Thank you.
And sometimes it's hard to see that that's where things can go, given where you are now, but I think that's where they can go. Other questions?
Okay. In your book, The Case for Space, you answer on question how to get another solar systems in fastest way and which rocket engines fastest. There is another question, how to get these engines in fastest way. So, of course, it's economical growth, but fastest economical growth only can be without state at all. So, I think we shouldn't have, we should stop pay to our bureaucrats and pay taxes, and Mars should not have government at all. It should be free space for people. And also about Twitter and Elon Musk, I think it's most important, one of the most important his project, because Twitter is instrument in another war. There is another war, it's world civil war nowadays between collectivists and individualists, between libertarians and socialists, between globalists and capitalists. So I think it's very important, because if we lose this war, it will be disgusting world of tyranny and dictatorship. So, and now Elon started to read Austrian economists' books and choice he was in some way leftist, but now he on the right side of the liberty. So I'm very happy.
Okay. Well, we could discuss that. I don't think that Tucker Carlson is on the side of liberty. I think he's on the side of coup. And Elon Musk has thrown in his lot with people like that. Okay, now, it is, okay, so a couple of things. Okay, let me, number one, absolutely free enterprise is the way to develop fusion rockets, which are at least within science as it's currently understood, the best possible rocket for to enable interstellar travel. Partially as a result of SpaceX, there is an entrepreneurial revolution happening in fusion power right now, and I think I discuss it in the book a little. But there are investors have looked at fusion, which has been stagnated under government control, and said the problem there is really the same problem that was with reusable space launch. It's not fundamentally technical, it's institutional. We need entrepreneurial companies doing this, and a bunch of entrepreneurial fusion companies have been funded, and they are moving much more rapidly than the international government fusion program. So I'll give you that 100%. Now, secondly, however, okay, governments are necessary. Without a government, private property is impossible. Okay? No, it is. Okay, I own a house. Okay, I don't know if you own a house, but I do own a house. And how do I own a house? Okay, I'm not that strong. What stops 3 strong men from coming into my house and throwing me out? The police. Okay? And I have a piece of paper, the title to my house, that will be honored by the police. I can show it to them and say, these 3 men who have come into my house have no right to be in my house. Get them out of my house. Okay? That's how I own a house. No one would own anything. In order for there to be property titles, there has to be a government. You can't have private property without a government. The problem then is controlling government to make sure it doesn't become a tyranny. Okay? And that is why, and that's a very difficult problem, which the founders of the United States attempted to solve by dividing the power, okay, so that no one person has all the power. There's the president, there's 2 houses of Congress, there's the Supreme Court, there's the state governments, there's the local governments. there's the Constitution, there's all these different things that prevent any one person from having total power, okay? And so far, this is sort of worked. And I do believe that although Martian cities will put it to the test, okay, it may be that one Martian city decides to have a dictator and it works out great. I personally don't believe that that is likely to happen. I think that that's not a good formula. I also don't think that direct democracy with the whole population voting on everything and whatever they say goes is the best thing, because a mob can easily be misled. And you want to have checks and balances on it. That's what I think, okay? But it will be experience that determines these things. But I have to tell you, yes, I am not a fan of government bureaucracies, but I do believe that governments are necessary. And as far as this business about the globalists and so forth is concerned, you should know that what Putin has done in order to try to defeat the West is the Kremlin has sponsored in every Western country, America first, France first, Germany first, Poland first, to break up the Western alliance. So you have the people that Musk has allied himself with, the America First people, saying, why should we care about Ukraine? It's all the way over there, okay? And of course the AfD in Germany saying, why should we care about Ukraine? It's all the way over there. And and if all the countries in the Western Alliance only care about themselves, then Putin and the Chinese can pick them off one by one. And this is what caused World War II. When France and Britain said, why should we care about Czechoslovakia? Okay, it's way over there. In fact, Chamberlain said, you know, the idea that we should go to war to protect some people in a faraway place, and we don't really know what this is all about, forget it, okay? The peace in 1945, a bunch of very smart men got together and said, how do we prevent this from happening again? Okay, and they came up with an answer, which was two principles: collective security and free trade. And as a result of that formula being adopted, while there's been small wars here and there, like Vietnam and so forth, there hasn't been a general war since 1945, nor has there been a depression, total collapse of the world economy, okay? And Trump, who is one of these people, Trump is a Russian asset, okay, is challenging it. Oh, these are the globalists who want there to be free trade. Let's have tariffs, okay? Let's shut out the European goods. That's a formula for depression. Let's forget about NATO, okay? Let's walk away from that, okay? Why should, I mean, America, we're safe. We got oceans to protect us. So let them take Estonia. Let them take Ukraine. Who cares? Okay, this is not a formula for peace. This is a formula for letting the enemy win, okay? So I have to disagree with you on that. But I don't want to get into an extended discussion. Yes, Sir Dick.
Друзі, давайте, щоб було більше часу на спілкування з Робертом особисто. Я з вашого дозволу дам питання найстаршому члену марсіанського товариства Анатолію Степановичу. І решту питань пропоную задати Роберту особисто в спілкуванні. Добре? Добре. Петро Степанович, яке питання було?
Яке участь ви приймали у розробці ракети багаторазового використання?
In which way did you relate or participate in this multi-stage rocket that SpaceX built?
Only that I helped recruit. I helped convince Elon Musk that the most important thing he could do with his life was make humans to Mars a reality. Okay. Musk read my book, my first book, The Case for Mars, which Sergey is going to publish in Ukrainian at some point in the reasonably near future. So that book was about how and why we should go to Mars. Okay. And he then came to a Mars Society fundraiser in California in 2001. And we were raising money to build our desert station. And it was a $500 a plate dinner at the house of one of our wealthier members. And we got a check mailed to us for $5,000. And I looked at that and said, why is he sending $5,000? This is $500 a plate dinner. Who is this? Elon Musk. Never heard of him. So we did some research and we found out that he was the head of PayPal. So, okay, I had a 2-hour cup of coffee with him before the event. And then I had all the right people sitting next to him at the event. And we recruited him to the Mars Society. He became a member of the board of the Mars Society. And it was that way for a while. But then at a certain point, he said to me, look, I'm not the kind of person that wants to be part of someone else's operation. I must do my own operation. And at this point, he was already worth about $200 million. And he said, so I already have all the money I need for anything, okay? And I'm wondering what I will do with the rest of my life. Okay, he's like 31 years old. I'm torn between either it's Mars or it's solar energy, okay? And I'm going to do one or the other, because these are the two most important things I can think of. And I argued for Mars. And I pointed out that solar energy was something that had an obvious commercial business case. If anyone has a new technology in solar energy, they can get investment. But humans to Mars, no, you can't go to Wall Street and just say, here's the plan, humans to Mars, invest in my company. Okay? So it's going to take someone like you who sees the vision. Now, in the end, he decided to do both and then also did the electric car company too. Okay? After that, it was mostly him. He did take some of my ideas, choosing methane oxygen propulsion for the rocket, basing his Mars mission plan on the Mars Direct plan. There's a number of ideas in the SpaceX plan and in their technology that come from me. But certainly he built that company himself, and he recruited a fantastic team and inspired it and led it to accomplish great things, and also, frankly, had to deal with political battles with big aerospace companies that were trying to murder SpaceX in its cradle by, for instance, trying to convince the Air Force not to let them launch from their launch sites and this kind of thing. He had to deal with all of that. So that's all Musk. That's all his talent. I just recruited him. He did the rest.
Дякую, Роберт.